So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House? We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie. So now we're going to do a little bit of a roundup of some of the stuff that has come out about Jeffrey Epstein from this side of the pond, because of course these documents have been released by the Trump administration, interestingly.
Yeah, I mean,
look, and there's nothing much bad about Trump in them, surprisingly.
Well, there are actually plenty of things about Trump. I mean,
but they're all are they not all press briefings on what is in the media about him? There's been nothing really.
No, there has been very specific allegations against them. Now, obviously, the Epstein files are literally millions of pages of documents, and they are collected by the FBI over the whole period of which Jeffrey Epstein was, you know, every report that's ever been made about him.
Yeah. So
there are allegations made against Trump, but they're unsubstantiated allegations, and clearly, you know, no criminal charges were ever brought. I mean, it's been the biggest story in the world without a shadow of a doubt, for, you know, the biggest crime story possibly ever, in a way. And it's affected, you know, it looks like it's going to bring down Keir Starmer, for example. It is going to have huge implications across the world for some of the richest and most wealthy, powerful people that have, you know, ever existed. But Ireland has, you know, I suppose been featured a number of times in these documents, and people can go online, you type in a name and you can return it.
Yeah, because you'd have to do that with the amount of documents there are. A human being probably doesn't have the capabilities of going through all those pages and whatever. So there are search engines that I'm sure everybody knows. You can type in a name and it'll throw back whatever has, you know, been mentioned about it. Now, the confusion I saw, or not the confusion, but what would make things more and more difficult is that the communications are also about what media is there. So it's kind of like a press briefing stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of the emails, you know, if I typed in Niall Donald and I got a hit in it,
you won't get a hit.
You could sue me for this.
Yeah.
And which we're going to go on to talk about in a minute. But say if I did and I got a hit, the hit might be that there was this story in this media organisation by a journalist called Niall Donald.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
There's a rake of, there's millions of documents.
So much.
Everything is in there.
Yeah.
Now, when you, for example, with Trump, there are, you know, a specific report that the US authorities took from a woman at some point claiming she was a victim of an attack by Trump. But, you know, they literally write down everything. I mean, you know, once Jeffrey Epstein started appearing in the media on a regular basis, they started getting hundreds of calls, just like we do all the time. There's just no doubt what the Epstein files have revealed is that, you know, what people have always suspected, which is that there are extremely powerful people, mostly men, who exist in a world where they're all interacting with each other. Some of them certainly are abusing young women for their own advantage. And this exchange of power and favour goes on.
It's kind of shocking, and it's a little bit hard to deal with it psychologically, isn't it? Even though we're far away from it here, but just everything that's happening in the States, the regime that is built up around Trump, you know, what's happening with those, that human beings can do and are willing to do what they're doing at the moment. So it's quite shocking. And if you actually don't throw an eye over the States or news, or if you listen to some podcasts like The Rest is Politics US or whatever, if you take a break from it for even a few days, you miss something massive, because there's something massive happening nearly every day, you know?
There is, but I think what the Epstein files have shown is, like, I was talking to somebody who's got a family member who's a conspiracy theorist, and she said she was talking to that person who said, I've been proven right. And, you know, while that might not be fully correct in that the Epstein files haven't shown, for example, that he was, you know, although people do suspect, for example, he was an agent of Russia or Mossad or something, But they do show that there is this
Oh, there
world.
was that elite.
There is that
Yeah.
elite, and
Yeah.
that elite are not good people.
No, exactly.
And that they do manipulate events for their favour.
I think coupled with what's happening day to day in the States, these Epstein files are very difficult to cope with.
Yeah.
You know, you have to kind of come away from them a little bit, don't you?
Oh, totally.
Because you have to realise, like, it's shocking to think that's happening in the world.
It's shocking to think that that's happening in the world. And also you realise that the guardrails that we think are put in place, for example, a sort of independent legal system or, standards in public life, all of those things, they are being bypassed by people that are extremely wealthy. And some of those people, some of the time, are willing to cause chaos in order to profit. Now, with the Epstein files, of course, there are two stages to Jeffrey Epstein's existence. At first, people can interact with this guy. He's inviting them to parties. And for all intents and purposes, he's just a rich New York
with no conviction.
Financier. Exactly. Now, at some point, he is convicted. I think it's in 2006 or 2007. He is sent to prison. He gets a remarkably light prison term of about 18 months. And he then becomes a convicted sex offender.
Yeah.
He's ultimately, I think it's released in 2009. And at that point, his case has been in the media. He's a convicted sex offender involved in having, sexual...
Securing an underage 18-year-old girl for prostitution.
Exactly.
And actually, it was a plea deal that he went to prison on. And the investigation into that was actually triggered by allegations made by parents of 14-year-old girls.
Exactly. Now, he gets a very easy time in the courts, and that becomes a source of controversy, absolutely. But either way, no matter what, he becomes somebody who is a child sex offender. And he comes out of prison, and you would think that would be the end of his existence as a figure of influence and a figure of a socialite, but it doesn't.
This was argued, and we will be coming on to that, but the child sex offender thing, I mean, it was the paedophile label that didn't sit well with a particular person we're going to talk about here, but do we say child sex offender, or it is the girls that are caught up in the Epstein world are teenagers?
No, I mean, they're all sorts of girls. I mean, they're underage girls.
They're underage, but
they're underage, there's young, and there's women. I mean, there's so many of them. That they cover all those categories.
Yeah.
Obviously, his conviction related to somebody, I think was she 17 or 18?
Well, the claim was that she was 17 3/4, which is...
So obviously that would be, there's an age of consent that differs in different places in the US and in different countries. But that's irrelevant because he was also having sexual relations with underage girls at the same time.
And providing and procuring them for others, I mean, is really it. And absolutely, but I'm just making that slight...
Yeah, so there is a legal distinction.
There is a legal distinction, but also probably we should accept that we don't need to be horrified that the victims that are groomed by Epstein and co. and used by them can be women and they can be older teenagers. They're not just children. They're not just totally vulnerable children plucked, in the same way that you have paedophile rings from the Catholic Church and all the rest of it, and small children have been abused. We should be equally horrified that teenagers coming of age have been treated and abused in such a way and terrified and frightened.
And of course, Ghislaine Maxwell is kind of, I suppose, pimp would be the simplest term for her. She particularly picked on sort of vulnerable girls, really, who maybe...
Some of them are on the streets, some of them without...
Exactly, and family breakdowns and drug use, and really targeted them.
Because of course, the same thing happens with grooming in, kids being groomed into drug gangs and all the rest of it. That is seen as, you're not forcing somebody to do something.
No.
It's easier to lure them, to tempt them with something. And the girls that she targeted would have been tempted with money. Yeah. They would have been tempted with
opportunity.
Exactly, opportunity, and being told that there was this opportunity. So they're not going willingly because they're going into this world where there's such a power, like such a
Imbalance,
imbalance.
Yeah.
Whereas they're being lured, it's like sort of, holding out a treat for a dog. They'll come and then they're treated badly where they are.
Yeah,
but it's easier than actually physically forcing somebody in the first place.
Totally, but I mean, it was a very structured way that they did it. That they'd break down a bit of a barrier first, and then they go to the next level and go to the next level, and it was highly organized, and it went on literally every single day for many, many years, and ultimately he was convicted of this really, really low, the lowest possible offence he could be nearly. But he was still convicted. Mm-hmm. He still went to prison, sort of relatively easy prison. And he then came out, and the men in his orbit just continued as if he'd just taken a gap year and gone away to Southeast Asia, despite knowing what he was doing, despite him admitting it, because he pled guilty. It wasn't as if he said, I've been wrongly convicted, I didn't do this.
But the point is, the men in his orbit were using his services. So they wouldn't be horrified. They'd be horrified that he was convicted, that they hadn't enough power really to stop him.
Well, they would be, for a start, right? I mean, they you would think that they would be horrified. You would think that they would think, I'm not going to associate with a convicted sex offender. I'm not going to hang around with a sex offender. I mean, that's not a complicated thing to do.
A person who wasn't part of the extracurricular services, and who was within his realm, you'd imagine they could sort of go, I don't want anything to do with this guy. But a lot of those powerful people, as we've now know, that were around Epstein, were around him because they wanted his services.
But it's not just that. And I totally agree with you, because of course, like Prince Andrew or whatever, he's not a prince anymore.
But he ain't going to be horrified by that.
He's not going to be, because he's engaging in it, and he's effectively a sex offender himself. I mean, he is a sex offender.
He's horrified by the fact that it's
that he's going to get caught, or horrified that these women are kicking up.
Yeah.
But there was also, Peter Mandelson, obviously the former Labour minister, former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who's really been the first really major scalp of this. I mean, Peter Mandelson's a gay man, so he wasn't engaging in sex with these women. So, that's a fact. So it wasn't just for sex. There's all these other men hanging around for money, contacts. Peter Mandelson, may end up in prison for basically taking money off Epstein. So it wasn't just sex. There's also
the financial sort of plans of the Gordon Brown government. He was feeding him.
He was feeding Epstein information, but he also was getting money.
He was getting money, and his husband had a course paid for in whatever. Everybody has spoken about Mandelson being a cheap date.
Yeah,
because the kind of money was small. But actually, and that really brings us on to the reason we're talking about this, because we could, you can meander around this Epstein story forever. But we were really wanting to talk about and just discuss the kind of stories that are closer to home when it comes to the Epstein files. And there has been some pretty good reporting here in this country. Why don't you start with what our colleagues in the Sunday Independent broke this week in relation to this story? There's a girl, I think a woman who is here in Ireland, who claimed that Epstein was here.
Yeah, so Epstein was here. That is a fact, and he was here ahead of his conviction. At some point, he certainly attended an event with people like Bertie Ahern and many others, and now he was just in the crowd. There's no suggestion that Bertie Ahern or anybody would have met with him privately. But as part of the files released, there is a report, and it's a slightly redacted report from one woman claiming to be a victim of Epstein, where she says that she had sex with a number of powerful men in Ireland. Now, we don't know the full details of times and dates, but one of the one of the survivors, one of Epstein's victims, a woman called Lisa Phillips, has called for this to be investigated properly by the Gardaí. Now, she said that it's time to connect the dots and see what's there. Basically, she says, why wouldn't you look into this? If it's in the files, it's there for a reason, she said in relation to this allegation. I don't believe that people call the FBI to report very powerful people unless there's a reason to do so. And, that this is the point. The woman's allegations are set out in an email to the FBI last October, and she claimed she had photos that proved she was on Epstein's islands and could provide them if necessary. And basically, she alleges she was flown to Ireland and that she had sex with a number of.
And does she specify, are they Irish or are they powerful men without? Is she specifying that they're Irish men or just
she specifies that she was sexually assaulted in Ireland.
In Ireland, yeah.
So, exactly, we don't fully know those sort of details. But basically, what Lisa Phillips is saying, and she's one of the people that are outspoken, she's saying, well, it's up to you to investigate this now. It's not enough to say, well, we don't have any more information.
Yeah.
It's up to you to it's up to the Irish officials to make contact with the FBI and get more information.
Yeah.
And then Maeve Sheehan, also our colleague in the Sunday Indo. So Epstein, there is a number of references to Epstein coming into Ireland, having contacts with Irish people, meeting people here. And she gives a long example of one of these occasions. And this is in 2002, before Epstein's conviction.
Yeah.
Where people wouldn't, they'd have no reason not to meet Epstein, let's put it that way. But it does show the circles that he's moving in. And it was at a summit in the Four Seasons Hotel in Ballsbridge. It was organised by the Washington Academy of Achievement. And the guest list included people like Bono, Enya, Frank McCourt, the author, Jeremy Irons, and then many others. Mostly the political figures, some of them that have a long association with Epstein, including Bill Clinton, Gorbachev, and of course, US Senator George Mitchell. George Mitchell,
I know,
would have been, somebody really fated in this country because of his role in the Belfast Agreement. Very much seen almost as this whiter than white heroic character.
Yeah,
because,
for sure.
But of course, his reputation has been absolutely destroyed.
Disappointing.
Yeah, by his ongoing interactions with Epstein over many, many, many years. And so he was also there. And, he flew into this. Ghislaine Maxwell was also here. And so it just shows you this is the circles he's moving in.
Yeah, so there's stuff to investigate really here, given what we now know about Epstein and what was going on. The fact that he was here and he was mixing, there is definitely, keep an open mind about what may or may not have happened here. I think there's a really interesting story that was broken in our sister publication, the Belfast Telegraph, over the weekend. And it was a story by Sam McBride. Now, I have spent, having read this, my time talking about this story to other journalists and to lawyers. Yeah. And I mean, you'd stop on a corridor if you met either a lawyer or a journalist to talk about this. Yes. And I hope it's not just a little train spotting thing that just interests us.
But there's a bit of it, but it is.
But I'll try and explain maybe why I think this is a very this is a story in the public interest. So there's a lawyer called Paul Tweed who would be a pretty famous, almost celebrity lawyer. He's from Northern Ireland, yeah?
He's from Northern Ireland. I mean, he's one of the few lawyers that is interviewed as himself.
He's got this sort of celebrity status because he had very high profile clients, celebrity clients. And there was a kind of a sense, certainly over a period of time, that anybody who had felt they had been, either hard done by or libelled by the media, they would go to Tweed.
Yeah.
So anybody famous and there's a list the length of your arm about who he represented. And he was somebody who, within media organisations, if a letter came in from Tweed representing somebody, there was a sense of a bit of a chill factor to it at one point.
Absolutely.
Because, this was like, coming from, a high-profile lawyer, but you knew the client was going to be somebody very wealthy.
Yes.
Paul Tweed was not representing, somebody, some unemployed.
Well, I'll give you a list of some of the people he's represented: Harrison Ford, Justin Timberlake, J-Lo, Liam Neeson, Britney Spears, Uri Geller, who used to bend the spoons, and many, many others in between.
Exactly. So there was this kind of combination of Paul Tweed plus this very powerful, very rich client coming at the media. So that was kind of who Tweed was, his reputation. I think kind of in more recent years, he's probably working more so out of the country in the Middle East, and he has clients and all the rest of it. But this story is basically, and it's set after this conviction you speak about that Epstein had. So at this point, he has a conviction for procuring an under 18 minor in the States where he was convicted. 18 was the legal age.
Yes.
Okay. So what happens is that in the aftermath of this, Sarah Ferguson gives an interview, I think, to the Evening Standard.
Yes.
And later that interview is picked up by the Telegraph and various other media. And in the interview, she says that she doesn't want any more to do with Epstein. She's known him and he's loaned her money, she says, and she wants to get that money back to him. And she calls him a paedophile.
Yes. So he has come out of, he served his sentence, I think.
Yeah.
He's come out at this point, and this is the first really big mention of him, I think, in the international media.
And Sarah Ferguson, of course, is who she is and is been as, she's not then married, I don't think, to Prince Andrew. No. I think they're ex-partners, but they have that weird sort of ongoing friendship that they have enjoyed, and she's still living essentially off the royals.
It would be an enjoyable one, but yeah.
Well, for either of them. Yeah. But anyway, she's still living in the palace properties and trying to live off live off
her. I mean, she seems to have just terrible money troubles because she spent too much that she didn't earn. So she's living off her being an ex-princess and also getting bits of money off people, basically. Yes. And she got in trouble for basically, the interview came on the back after she had, she'd been accused of taking money to get an introduction into Prince Andrew as a trade envoy. And then she did an interview kind of to recover her reputation. And as part of that, she mentions she has a go at Jeffrey Epstein.
So Epstein has come out of jail, as you say, and he's trying to,
relaunch himself, really.
And kind of minimize the damage to his reputation.
Exactly.
Okay? So he has this PR advisor called Mike Citrick, and he's known as the LA Wizard of Spin.
Yeah.
And Citrick has represented some of the most high-profile, what would we
wrongdoers?
Call them? Wrongdoers, yes. Yeah. Harvey Weinstein and the Church of Scientology he's represented as well, right?
He's got his work cut out for
This is an interesting guy, the Wizard of Spin. So the Wizard of Spin gets on to Paul Tweed, the lawyer, because he wants him to push back against this comments made by Sarah Ferguson in the media. And he sort of is being advised. Now, the Belfast Telegraph have printed in full, I would imagine, the communications between Tweed and Epstein Citrick and his advisors and which is a little bit unusual because solicitors have privilege and you're not supposed to publish in any way, shape or form their communications with their clients.
Yeah, so let's, if you look at it, and hopefully there's a lot of people listening who've never received legal letters, but we couldn't say the same. So, I mean, all these legal letters are privileged, and it's kind of by law that they can never be published, basically, without consent. I mean, it's really, really strong protection. But what happened in these Epstein files is Congress had a vote and have released them en masse. I mean, it's unprecedented. So the people writing these letters would have just presumed that they would never, ever become public knowledge. I mean, it's just the way it is. But they have.
Now, before I go into the detail of what happened and the advisors and the Tweed and the work he did for Epstein at this point in time. We need to say that Tweed himself has been contacted in relation to this by Sam McBride from the Belfast Telegraph. He has stood over what he has done, saying he acted within his professional and regulatory obligations, and he also said that he stopped working for Epstein because partly he stopped taking his advice, which you can actually see because Epstein is quite dismissive of Tweed.
And he also doesn't fancy paying his bills. But I suppose what Paul Tweed is saying, and in layman's terms, like, everybody's entitled to seek legal representation, and the lawyers are obliged to take on people that are of dodgy reputation, and even those people are entitled to a defence, and that's a lawyer's job. And we accept in society that lawyers are going to represent people that are morally objectionable, but that is an entitlement and they have that
democratic right.
Yeah, to have legal representation.
So basically what happens is Ferguson does this interview in the Evening Standard, right? And she admits accepting the £15,000 from Epstein, but calls him a paedophile and says she wants nothing to do with him and all the rest of it. So the LA Spin, King of Spin, is really desperately trying to sort of undo the damage he's seen done to Epstein this side of the water in the UK. And he sort of doesn't really know. He's trying to... You see, it's so different in the US because in the States, we look at some of the media reporting and how they can report stuff, and it's almost kamikaze to us.
Well, I mean, because there's a totally different... So there's a few things going on there, right? This is the first time it's been called a paedophile in the media. Now, the media strategy would be, let's crack down really, really hard on this. Let it be known we're cracking down, and it'll stop other people doing it. And that's a real media strategy. And they're attacking this in the UK press because there's much stronger libel laws. In the US, all you have to prove is not that it is true. You have to prove is that I thought it was true.
Exactly. Whereas you have to prove it here. So here I'm talking about this side of the Atlantic. In the UK is similar enough. But from the media point of view, they have this story. They have an interview with Sarah Ferguson, incredibly high-profile person, still a member of the royal family, even though she and Prince Andrew are no longer together. She's seen as that. She's living off the taxpayers' money, really, through the royals. And she has made this incredible statement against Epstein, her former friend. She's admitted that she borrowed this money. She's saying she's paying it back and she's calling him a paedophile. What the media have to run that is, firstly, her interview, and secondly, the conviction that he has. Yeah. Because there's a backup to her calling him that, because he actually has a conviction in a court of law in the US saying that he procured an underage female. So Citrick doesn't really know how to cope with this. I mean, he doesn't know how to deal with it. So he engages Tweed and he looks for his advice really on what can be done to try and limitate Epstein's reputation as regards this. So he in an email, in an email to Epstein on the 12th of March 2011, Citrick tells him he'd discussed the situation with Tweed, who'd represent everyone, he says, from Britney Spears to Gerry Adams. And Ian Paisley. And he describes Tweed as the defamation lawyer I've used in the UK. So he's singing him up like, this is the guy to go to. This is the man that's going to help us. And he outlines the strategy. He says that Tweed advocated beginning with a letter to the broadsheets, to the Telegraph in particular, which he describes as being among the worst offenders. Now, I am presuming that interview with Ferguson is picked up and used everywhere, as it would be. Yeah. So the Telegraph are the worst offenders, probably because they're the most highbrow media organisation. They're probably less worried about the Sun here and whoever else has touched this and redone this.
Because the Telegraph would be read by the people that Jeffrey Epstein wants to suck up to, really.
For sure. So he says that he describes, since they're a legitimate paper, they would be more likely to positively respond and less likely to make something of the fact that we were writing to them. However, as he said, that's Tweed, it's hard to see how it could get worse, right? So Citrick goes on to say that he and Tweed had discussed the definition of paedophilia, and he'd asked him upon what basis they could possibly justify using that word. So how could Sarah Ferguson, and really she said it, but it's actually the publishers of these newspapers that have the problem, if there is one, because they're the ones who are really putting it out to the mass market, right? Yeah. And And they're discussing this word paedophilia, and they're saying that in the UK, they've come up with this strategy to go at the media, to sort of ask them to reverse and apologise and take this back, that the age of consent is 16. And had the act that he was convicted of, Epstein, occurred in the UK, it wouldn't have been a crime.
Yeah.
So that's picking at a little bit of straw. I mean, that's pretty much a kind of
what they're doing is they're splitting hairs, okay? So I mean, they're saying, so they're trying to make this distinction between what happened in the US and what happened there. And they're trying to rely on the fact that they might have this technical get out that doesn't make him a paedophile in the UK.
Yes.
But of course, the newspaper, presumably are going to say, well, it doesn't matter whether, there's some sort of technical get out. A paedophile is a paedophile. And that's what Epstein is.
Yes. And they've discussed further with Tweed how this woman is 17 and 3/4 years old, the victim, and that he says to Epstein, you were convicted of soliciting prostitution from a woman 17 and 3/4 years old. Their rationale, I believe, would be the published stories of accusations that you got a massage from a 13 or 14-year-old while they were in their underwear. But these are unproven allegations, and in the UK, as you know, the burden of proof is on them. So that's what I was saying to you. That investigation that resulted in that conviction, which was a plea deal, which is questionable, that Epstein got. The original investigation had begun after some kids, parents, I think, of them, came forward to police and said their 14-year-olds, I didn't realise it was a 13-year-old as well, it was certainly a 14-year-old, had been sort of sexually assaulted. That's how that whole investigation kicked off.
And I think that was said in court, and it was revealed as part of his conviction, but he wasn't prosecuted for it.
No, he wasn't, because he did the plea deal and pleaded guilty to this one victims, the 17-and-3/4-year-old. So what basically the conversations between Citrick and Tweed is that this is what they might come back and say, the media, but these allegations were not proven in court.
Yeah.
So that's, they're trying to weigh up, who's in the winning seat. This is a kind of a game nearly that they're going to play with the media to see what they can get.
Yeah.
So he tells Epstein that Tweed guessed the papers would say you're on the sex offenders list.
Yeah.
But he wants to think about that. I said that didn't cut it in my view. The one does not equate to the other. So in other words, he's on the sex offenders list.
That doesn't make you a paedophile.
Doesn't make you a paedophile, okay? So now, they're working out their strategy.
But there's also
here.
an interesting bit where he says that, that Tweed emails Epstein to say that, that there's also a reference to him using a private fleet of aircraft to transfer underage girls around the world for illegal sex. And Tweed tells Epstein he assumes this is a reference to allegations emanating from civil lawsuits.
Yes.
So these are going on in the background at the time. There's a number of women who are suing Jeffrey Epstein, saying they were sexually abused. These are civil cases, so they're suing him as an individual. They're not criminal cases. It's a slightly different thing. But again, they're splitting hairs. There's women out there saying, that there's this sex ring going on and that he was behind it. The fact that it's not a criminal conviction, it doesn't.
And Epstein actually responds and says there's no truths in any of this.
Yeah.
He copies in another lawyer at this stage. So anyway, Epstein tells Tweed and Citrick that I do not want to start a fight over the girl. It's a prescription for rebuttal and an encouragement for them to claim others so and so. So really he's sort of, trying to work out a strategy. They're trying to work out what they say, how they handle their response to the media publishing this and what the media might say back to them and how they'll handle that.
They're trying to shut it down.
They're trying to shut it down.
At source.
And in fairness to Tweed, he's given pretty, you know what I mean? If you were in that position, he's actually raising probably the correct things that are going to come back.
Yeah, and
these are the kind of things that are going to come back at them. The sex offenders register. He wants further information on what's happening in these civil lawsuits. He wants to kind of know from this client, is there anything I should know here?
Yeah.
I can't go to battle for you unless I know kind of everything. And I mean, that's, I suppose, really what every defence solicitor needs. So anyway, Tweed thinks about it overnight and then he sends a robust letter to the Daily Telegraph denouncing, quotes, grossly inaccurate and persistent references to him being a paedophile. And he states in it, our client is not, as your headline article alleges, a convicted paedophile, although he has been convicted of soliciting prostitutes and procuring a person under 18 for prostitution. He served his time for that offence. As a matter of record, but without seeking to justify the offence, the girls in question were not prepubescent.
Yes, and then he goes further on, describing these as defamatory allegations and malicious falsehoods. Tweed added, the false and distorted terminology used by you to describe our client in your vitriolic attack on his character is simply not true on any interpretation of the word paedophile. So this is the letter. He is not a paedophile. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein is a paedophile, and we can confidently say that now.
And has a conviction for that at this point in time. But, you know, you talk about splitting hairs, and there is another word used for people who sexually assault girls of the age of which this one victim was, and that's hebephile. So what, you know, most people don't use that word.
No. So the common usage of the word paedophile, the word that people, if you meet somebody on the street, a paedophile is somebody in their mind who sexually abuses anybody underage.
Yeah.
That's it. That makes them a paedophile. But of course, there are sort of more medical, technical definitions, you know, that, you know, were to do with if girls are prepubescent or girls or young boys are prepubescent or postpubescent, or there's other categories, subcategories. But the common usage is you're a paedophile if you abuse anybody underage. And, you know, you can split hairs all you want, but that is what people understand that term to be.
Now, the Epstein's people also go to Ferguson separately in order to try and get her to retract the statement. And Tweed is involved with that. On the 6th of April, these documents, these from the document dump, have shown that Tweed told Epstein he'd spoken to Ferguson's lawyer and told him, we're continuing to put pressure on the Daily Telegraph to retract their outrageous description of you. And in an undated message to Epstein, he draws his attention to the cover of Private Eye, describing it as very provocative and adding, although Private Eye is an absolute rag of a publication, nonetheless it is currently sitting in a prominent position on newsagent stands here in the UK. So he's pointing out other things from. I think ultimately we don't need to go through all of this.
No.
But ultimately what happens is Tweed doesn't really get anywhere.
No.
And he doesn't really have a very strong strategy, because I don't really think he has a very strong case. He's been, you know, he's taken on this job for somebody, and there's a lot of problems with what he's trying to do. He's trying to get the paedophile thing retracted, despite the fact your man is on the sex offenders register, despite the fact there's all these civil lawsuits in existence for worse claims than what he's actually convicted of, despite his conviction. So he's kind of really fighting a losing battle. But he still tries, and he gives advice to Epstein about the press. What is it? The press
complaints.
Complaints, that he says that's a good way, really, of kind of starting almost like, he doesn't use the word, but it's almost a good way of starting to gag the media.
Yeah, so it's not, of course, he doesn't say gag.
He doesn't say gag.
What can happen with the press complaints is he's not going to get any money. Epstein's not looking to sue papers for any money at this stage.
No.
He's looking to shut down this debate, and the press complaints would be a route to do that, where the burden of proof is, you know, in fact, it's probably lower than in a civil action. So you could get a finding to say he's not a paedophile, and that would therefore another newspaper would have to go against that. So it would have an impact.
And Tweed ultimately, I think, Epstein, because he's more used to the US media, he's not used to these sort of trudging steps you have to go through in order to have something retracted or even get into a discussion about having something retracted. But I think the documents, so ultimately, basically, he doesn't even particularly seem to want to pay Tweed. And Tweed ends up going back to him and saying, listen, I'll take 50% of this if I want you as a client. He calls him a blue chip client at one stage. And also,
the other funny thing about Epstein, he was notorious for not paying his bills as well.
Yeah, no, it seems to be really mean.
Yeah.
the Tweed thing as well, it's interesting because you get an idea, and of course we shouldn't be reading these emails or this,
No.
because these are usually privileged, but you get a sense of how Tweed is working in the background for these powerful clients. And I think that the point of this story and the reason this is so important is it shows how powerful people can use the legal system against the media in order to shut down the exposure of the kind of scandals that this is.
Exactly. If you have enough money and you can employ enough specialists, even if you are guilty, as Epstein was, of a very, very serious criminal offence, even back then, there are people who can help strategize to stop that discussion. And we know this well, working in the media in Ireland. There are people in Ireland, in this country, that are powerful people that use these strategies every day. And it's very difficult for the media if somebody's willing to throw enough money at it. Because Epstein clearly isn't trying to get money out of the paper. He's just willing to
he just wants to
shut it down.
Yeah, he wants to damage limitation around his reputation.
Yeah.
Now, this is the most interesting thing I would have thought, and this is really maybe just the kind of the train spotters, media and lawyers would find interesting, but Tweed is failing really to get anywhere. So he tries another tactic and he tells Epstein that he's an idea to, quote, crack this open by the back door, so to speak. And he says that he has a generally good relationship with the legal managers of The Guardian, The Times and The Sunday Times, which also had called Epstein a paedophile. He said that indeed, quote, the Sunday Times often retain me, if only to stop me suing them. And it may be that I could pursue one or both of them to publish a clarification, which they could use as leverage in relation to the other publications. If nothing else, that has to be embarrassing for Tweed and the legal managers of those
of course
mighty organs of truth and justice.
Well, of course, and they're not. That's Paul Tweed saying it to somebody. It's not them agreeing with that interpretation of their relationship. But yeah, it's funny because you can see these retractions sometimes appear in newspapers, and that we would know, for example, and I can think of one not too long ago where the newspaper have retracted something even though that's probably true.
Yeah,
and then the person that has that retraction then hawks that around to other newspapers saying, I've got this retraction now. It's, to apply pressure to other, it's a murky business.
It is. And there's been a lot of, pressure put on politicians to sort of change the libel laws to make it a bit of a more fair playing field. Because we do adhere to very strict, codes of conducts and we really have to get things right.
Yeah, we do. And of course there is a new defamation bill being discussed in the Dáil.
How long has it been discussed for?
Well, it's
20 years. My entire career it's been discussed.
Well, I mean it has progressed in fairness, but yeah, it's something that we would know well, but it is an interesting insight into how people try and manage their reputation. And I mean, remember, like Epstein at this point, he's still trying to shut this down, knowing that there's a huge amount of women coming forward, and he's been convicted. He's gone to jail, and he's still trying to stop it, and still believes that he can get away with it. And of course, in part, he did get away with it for a few years, and it's just amazing. If you think about those stories are in there in 2011, Sarah Ferguson calling him a paedophile, and then all of these men. Rich and powerful men continue to meet, contact them. I mean, some of the emails where they're, asking him for advice on relationships, and it's just so. It's really quite incredible.
It is. It's overwhelming. The people that have been caught up in it, disappointing, overwhelming, sort of frightening. It's just hard to believe some of those.
Yeah.
You see, we only see, the likes of George Mitchell.
Yeah.
He was sort of there as he didn't really kind of dig down into what he's like, but you see him as this hero of the peace process and somebody who because he did that, he has to be good and wholesome and have good morals. And then,
look, and I mean, from all angles, I mean, Noam Chomsky and Woody Allen, and I mean, not that Woody Allen is a person without a stain in his reputation, but people from the right of politics, from the left of politics, people from all areas. And I mean, obviously, somebody like Prince Andrew, like an instantly detestable character, but, other people that just aren't. Automatically, you wouldn't think that of them. And
smack bang in the middle of it, a woman facilitating the whole thing.
Yeah.
Ghislaine Maxwell. Yeah. Anyway, look, no doubt, just fascinating stuff. And we will come back to this if there's more sort of localised interest in it as well, because everybody can, my God, you can spend hours just...
Oh, look, and I mean, there's more to come as far as
there's more to come, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, leave that there. If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh-in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised. But the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that, do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy had, I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there, but the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on, he wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens, divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of, if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after being a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after, there's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
yes.
So he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons, and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail. But we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday, and this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation, and there was a bit of arguments going on, and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. His brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed? Because of that, they had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from The Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.